this is Susanna from Sinker Ranch Library. Today we're going to go over embroidery. I've got a design for you that we can work on together. We also have a packet of detailed information, some of which I cover in the video, down below in as a PDF, and the design. So let's get started.
First thing we'll cover is fabric. So really any kind of material will work. You'll want a nice cotton fabric to start out though, because you can embroider on paper or wood or leather, but when you're getting started, you'll kind of want to stick with cotton or linen. And there are also fat quarters that are for sale at craft stores that are just a great size to get started. This is just a cut up square fabric. Ideally you'll want to have pre-washed it and ironed it like you would with sewing, but today we'll just stick with this. Yeah, it's just a nice piece of fabric. And now for hoops, you'll want, there are two different kinds of, well, there are several different kinds of hoops, but the main ones you'll see are wood hoops and plastic hoops. And so they're measured by diameter across. And so these wood hoops are cheaper and they work for hanging projects, and they will work for getting started as well. But you also want to be careful about getting splinters. So if you have a minute, you might want to lightly sand it down to prevent splinters in yourself or in your fabric. And then also, since they're so, they just kind of come apart, what you might want to do with your hoop is also wrap the outer one with a bit of ribbon or cloth to help keep your project in place. Or if you're working on a big project that is bigger than your hoop, you'll want it so that way it helps protect your stitches. And then we also have these plastic ones that usually are labeled and set up this way. And they also have a catch, and then that helps keep your fabric in place. And so when you're shopping for a hoop, you'll want, it goes by diameter, by weight, by diameter, by inches. And so you want to find something that's pretty comfortable, something about like this where it fits your hand really nicely. You can experiment going up and down to find what works for you. And if you're doing bigger or smaller projects, you might want to look into getting smaller hoops or larger hoops. They go from 3 inches to about 12, and then there are these very large quilters hoops. They're very big, they're very thick. They're about this thick, which you might look into using as well in the future. But for now, we'll stick with a nice plastic hoop. And then next we'll cover, so basically you need needles that you can thread. There are many different kinds of needles. You'll probably want to look at the ones that say embroidery or crewel or chenille needles. Crewel, C-R-E-W-E-L. Not C-R-U-E-L. But basically, at the very minimum, you're going to want a needle you can thread. That's why I'm using these chenille needles, because they have such a nice wide eye that can fit the floss very nicely. But you also want to pay attention to how sharp it is, how thick the needle is, how wide the eye is. See these much smaller embroidery needles. They will work better for smaller floss or for finer projects. So a lot of it depends on what you're looking for your project and what you can comfortably work with as well. So for embroidery floss, it's floss. I might end up saying thread, but I'll mean embroidery floss. They come in these skeins. There are a couple of different brands. There's a very popular brand at your local craft supply place. And this is not it. But these are nice skeins of embroidery floss. And so what they are is they're 6 individual strands. Let me show you. There's 6 embroidery individual threads all twisted together like so. And so they're great because then you can separate them out for finer projects, or you can just stick with the 6 strand one. And so they're really nice, and they come in a variety of colors and also different types of materials. Some are metallic and some are satin. and they're great for, and, you know, you can just pick what depends on your project, but usually you'll end up wanting to stick with cotton. And then we'll cover patterns real quick. So the pattern we're going to be working on today, I got the lettering from canva.com, and then I used Microsoft Publisher just to make up the circles. These are going to be borders, and then we're doing reed. And so one way you can put that onto your fabric is a water-soluble marker. They're really nice. They work like so. And you'll always want to test it on a small corner of your fabric and then wash it out, just to make sure that it properly washes out of your material. They usually should, but just to be on the safe side, you don't want to finish a whole project and wash it and then watch the ink come back or ruin your project. And there's also air-soluble markers, and there's also iron-on patches or carbon paper that you can lay on top and sketch in. But I always recommend sticking with the water-soluble marker. And so you basically just go along and add little dots or your markings however you need it to be. So there's that. And then now we'll cover, and one more thing you'll want are some scissors, embroidery scissors. So there are different kinds of embroidery scissors. And you don't even necessarily need to have embroidery scissors. They're embroidery scissors because they're so big, and they're much easier to get into your embroidery project and snip your floss up. You'll usually see them as like a crane design where the beak is the point of the scissors. Personally, not my style, so I use just smaller scissors. But anything that's kind of small and sharp and pointed at the end will help, but it helps when they're short too. And so now we're going to get started on working on your project.
Now we're going to measure out how much floss you need for your needle. And so here's your skein of floss. Their number at the bottom is usually the color. If you go online, you can probably see number and the name of the color. And so there's the bottom of the skein, there's a little bit of floss at the bottom. It's the bottom of the skein, and so you'll take it, grab it like this with your wrist, and just pull along your arm. It's caught a little. And so you just kind of measure out from your shoulder to your wrist. So I'd say about 18 inches to 2 feet, and then you snip the floss there, and then you can go back on to threading.
And then if you're ever interested in working with fewer threads of floss, you can separate them out very carefully from about the middle of your project, and then gently pull apart from the middle. Just kind of go up and then go down when you're splitting them. It helps keep things from knotting as badly. Okay, so now to thread. So you can thread your needle through your eye like so. But I never really have a lot of patience for that, and that's why we're using a bigger eye. But when you're using a smaller eye, or if you don't have patience and you don't want to, put your floss in your mouth to wet it like normal, you can use a threader. I'm a big fan of these. You'll want to stick with this size if you get these. These ones are a little too big for most of your needles, and this one really only works for about 1, maybe 2 strands of floss. It will hardly ever work for anything bigger. So you're going to just put it through your needle like so, and just hook it over and pull it through, and then there you are. And I would say you'd want maybe double length of your needle, just sitting like so. And so one way, it's a really nice way to knot your thread, is what you'll do is you'll have your needle here. Here's your eye and here's your floss. You'll take the end of your floss and you'll lay it over your needle, so the end of your floss is facing the eye. So you're going to press that, hold that, and wrap around your needle just a few times. Okay, like so. And then you're going to take that wrapped floss and you're going to pull it over the eye of your needle, along the floss, like so. And you can just knot it too. It's just a really handy way. I find it to be a very handy way to do that, just to go through them over and over again. And one thing you'll want to think about, especially because it doesn't seem like a lot of floss, and when you're starting out it is plenty. If you end up working on bigger projects, what you can do is repeat this process multiple times and then just set them aside on some kind of pin cushion, and then you just have them all ready to go. So when you end up with when you're done with your floss, you'll start on with the next one, and we'll cover finishing up and knotting and starting on with a new needle. So now we're going to hoop our project. When you're working on a project, you want to figure out how big you want it to be, and then you'll want it to be several inches bigger. Please make it several inches bigger. Do your math, because you do not want to do a project that ends up being like so small you can't hoop it properly, especially if you only have one hoop and you don't have it in you to go to, especially if the craft store is closed. So I'm going to take the inner hoop, place it down. Then we're going to place our project down. And make it a little even. You don't have to have it perfect. And then we're going to place our bigger hoop that has been mostly unscrewed on top. And we're just going to screw it a little bit, and then we're going to go around lightly tugging, making sure, since this is plastic and it's got a bit of a catch on it, make sure that catch is up there instead of stuck in the middle. And then we'll screw some more and just gently go around tugging. Make sure everything is secure. You also want to be careful that you keep the weave of the cloth pretty even, but you also want it tight to help when you're framing. When you're done with your project, you'll want it to be pretty tight. And so a good way to tell that it's been pretty well hooped is it makes a very slight drumming sound when you tap on it. And sometimes you might need to pause while you're embroidering and stretch it out just a little bit. Be very careful of your weave and of your needlework, but just to go along and refresh that stitch. And that's why if you use a scrap of fabric wrapped around the outer hoop, it helps keep it still. So we're all hooped up, we're all threaded up, and now we're going to start.
Stay tuned for part 2.